Will Bethesda Game Studios' future games have multiplayer? In this video, I'm specifically going to be talking about whether Starfield, The Elder Scrolls 6, or potentially even a Fallout 5 will have multiplayer features or a full-on survival mode like Fallout 76. So naturally, this is not a known fact. I can't tell you 100% confirmed that multiplayer will be in Starfield, but what I can do and probably will do is point you in the direction of existing facts, certain indicators that already exist as to maybe why or why not multiplayer will be a fundamental feature going forward. And to be clear with this one, I'm not really talking about a fully multiplayer game. It's fairly confirmed at this point that that's not a thing. Around this past E3, there were many interviews in reference to Starfield, and it was quite clear that it would be a single player focus. But at the end, they also mentioned things like this.
Does that mean it's single player only? It won't have online? Like you're focusing that on just a single player experience?
Its focus is single player. Whether it has some social connection, I don't know. I don't want to guess right now.
Okay.
But that's our focus for that.
Could those other multiplayer or social features be something like an optional survival mode, an optional co-op mode? Even though not everybody's happy with the execution of multiplayer in Fallout 76, I think the premise of multiplayer in some of those other outlets, or even just as an optional component, has quite a bit of promise, quite evident by the fact that a fan-made multiplayer mod that wasn't perfect was making 35 grand a month only just recently. I think this is an interesting time to make this video because this is very likely a decision Bethesda is making now behind the scenes. Bethesda Game Studios started work on Starfield immediately after Fallout 4. They then at some point switched focus to Fallout 76, but are now back on Starfield. At the point of this past year's E3 in June 2018, the game was playable. That obviously being a very vague term, we don't actually know what that means or doesn't mean, but if the game was going to feature co-op or even just a multiplayer mode of some kind, it probably would have been decided already. As I did mention before, at this past E3, that was a major topic of questioning, wondering if future Bethesda games would have multiplayer. And one of the interesting parts is we got almost two separate answers. I showed you that answer from Todd Howard before, where he mentioned it would be focused on single player, but there might be some kind of social or multiplayer aspects. But really, he seemed uncertain. Although from Pete Hines, we got seemingly more concrete answers. In reference to future online games, he did mention that this is not forever and what we're doing. We're going to do a game that's just single player next time around. So these two quotes from around the same period seem to be somewhat contradictory, and I wanted to include this towards the first half of this video because for some of you, you might just take that as the fact that, alright, none of the future games will have multiplayer, but I personally don't. Maybe it's hopeful, maybe I just think Todd Howard knows more because he's on the development side more, but I actually think there's a number of indications that Bethesda might want to incorporate multiplayer into future games. First and foremost, the idea of multiplayer isn't new to these guys. They actually thought about adding multiplayer with Fallout 4. Now obviously that never came to fruition, but those ideas weren't totally scrapped. It ended up becoming the larger Fallout 76. But it does beg the question, what was that original idea? With Fallout 4, naturally they probably weren't planning an always online survival game. I imagine whatever multiplayer they had proposed, because we really don't have many details on it, it's mostly just based off of this quote from Todd Howard.
76 is the multiplayer design from Fallout 4.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
No one said that?
No.
It is.
I personally think what he might have been referencing there was something more the lines of a co-op mode, or some kind of alternate optional multiplayer, not something that's enforced like with Fallout 76. So to me, it indicates that is something Bethesda has been thinking about, but now looking ahead to Starfield and even some of their future games, we know they're using the same engine. This is another thing that was a big topic at this past E3. Bethesda did confirm though that for Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6, the same engine used for Fallout 4 and 76 would be returning. This is not new to them. Honestly, they've been using the same engine for a very long time, just making intermittent updates to it, and it'll probably be the same case going forward. That's not inherently a bad thing, as a lot of people assume. There is the potential to make significant upgrades and improvements to the engine. Many game companies build off existing or older engines while creating new ones. And I think this is the biggest indicator of why we will probably see some form of multiplayer in future games. We know that the creation engine, the one used for Fallout 4, and that Bethesda has confirmed is being used for future games, just got multiplayer support. With Fallout 76, they had the entire Battlecry Studios or Bethesda Game Studios Austin get that working.
Because the world that you have only had to be accessed by one player, so they were tightly intertwined. So what we had to do is essentially decouple Atlas from the world so there could be multiple people.
In the NoClip documentary, they spend a good chunk of time detailing how much work it actually required. So naturally, this was intended for Fallout 76, but I can't imagine they're just going to scrap it, to ignore all of this hard work and not take advantage of those further monetization opportunities with the future games they are adding in. So again, just to be totally clear, I don't think this means Starfield is going to be an online survival game. It'll be single player. You could probably play it just like you could Fallout 4, but the prospect of that game having some kind of optional online mode seems very high to me. Over the past few years, Bethesda has been upping and I think kind of changing the formula for monetization of their games. I think this all started with the DLC to Fallout 4. It was different, there was a lot of smaller packs, and then of course that evolved into Creation Club, and then finally with Fallout 76's Atomic Shop. I think some kind of multiplayer mode in Starfield using the progress they've made with Fallout 76 on the engine would create another big opportunity for that, adding in a bunch of cosmetics and probably generating a ton of money in the process. I could see this going a very similar route to what they did with Red Dead Redemption. And frankly, for me at least, it would just seem very crazy for Bethesda to put all this work into adding multiplayer to their engine to just stop using it after one game didn't maybe perform all that well or had a couple of controversies. I actually asked you guys before making this video, and I think a lot of people want or would enjoy different kinds of multiplayer in these games. Fallout 76 may have not executed it the best, but I think it's an idea that has promise, and I think Bethesda is invested into it. And one comment actually suggested this idea that originally multiplayer was being added to the engine just to add co-op to future games. But then Bethesda realized, hey, what if we just make this into a full game? And that's what Fallout 76 ended up being. That could honestly be a pretty good explanation for why it released with so many bugs, if it kind of was a last minute or more rushed decision compared to the otherwise 5-6 year development cycles, or even alternatively, why there's such a small team presently working on it. I know for some people there will be the concerns that there'll be too much of a focus on the multiplayer side going forward and it could take away from the single player side, but I honestly believe they could avoid that. Bethesda Game Studios has grown a lot in the past 3 or 4 years now. By the release of Fallout 4, they had 100 people, while now they have a full 400 people. They have the manpower to still create that core and very enjoyable single player experience while also potentially having an online mode. I think pretty much every game company out there is looking at how much money Rockstar made off of Grand Theft Auto 5's online mode and the DLC to it. And I would definitely argue that following Fallout 76 and following their recent expansions, they have all of the pieces to do that same thing with Starfield, or even potential games in the future. So in my eyes, this entire question really boils down to a money question. Bethesda invested quite a bit into getting multiplayer working in this engine, and even further, they want to continue making money through microtransactions. And for that reason, I could certainly see a future where Bethesda Game Studios puts out solid single-player games like they always have, but now also with online modes that do have various microtransaction avenues. For this one, time will certainly tell, but another big issue a lot of people do bring up is, well, what about all the new fans of Fallout 76? Is Bethesda going to cater to these at all going forward, or will they have to eventually just start searching for other games? So with this video in particular, I would love to hear your guys' take on this. I try to lay out all the facts, everything we know right now, but what do you think and what do you feel? Do you want the future Bethesda Game Studios titles like Starfield, The Elder Scrolls 6, or even Fallout 5 to have some multiplayer, whether that be co-op or a separate online survival mode? But even further, even if you don't want it, do you think it's going to happen? I personally subscribe to the idea that yes, I would like to see optional multiplayer in all future titles, but even further, I do think Bethesda does continue down this road, especially if Fallout 76 really was a massive flop. Continuing to use this engine, adding it into some of their future titles is a great way to continue monetizing this new improvement and really getting more money out of an otherwise underperforming game and the improvements you originally made for it. Although before we end things up, I am going to share today's psychology fun fact of the day. I haven't done one of these in a while because honestly, the classes I'm taking this year, they don't really lend themselves to fun facts so much. One of them's very experimental, reading papers, doing labs, and the other one's on the history of psychology, which a lot of it is honestly kind of hard to explain without explaining a bunch of other stuff in addition. But one of the really interesting aspects of psychology that was highlighted to me through that very class is how it's just different from the other sciences. So naturally, psychology is considered a social science, but at the same time, it has a lot of medical components. If you look at the brain, there are certain neurotransmitters firing, neurons communicating with one another, and we know for a fact this impacts behavior, it impacts the way you feel, and sometimes even the way you hurt. Yet there really isn't just like a concrete fix. For a lot of other diseases out there, people just give you a pill or something to take, and that pretty much absolves you of most of your symptoms. Why is this category so different? Why aren't we there yet with psychology? And the simple reality is, it seems like it's just way too complicated of a subject matter. Because when you're looking at mental processes and the brain, there are so many intervening factors, but also so much disagreement even among psychologists. As it stands today, there are several schools of thought in psychology. And what these do is basically set out the guidelines for how they're going to treat various things and what they should be studying. Schools of thought like this have existed all throughout psychology's history, and they have even for a lot of other sciences. The difference being, a lot of those other sciences ended up evolving out of it. One school might really focus on behavior, another one really focuses on unconscious forces. And then there's a separate one that focuses on all of that. While physics has many established laws that are just matter of fact, in psychology there's very few. And depending on which type of psychologist you interact with, you might get a different take on the same issue, which is interesting that we still haven't gotten past that point. Invariably, somebody's right, we just don't know who. Or alternatively, nobody's right and it's a combination of some existing ideas. But I think all of this plays a big role in why psychology is treated very differently than other medical sciences. Like, I don't think anyone denies that there are benefits from psychology for some people, not necessarily for everyone and not necessarily all the time. And I think all of this, all these varying and competing schools of thoughts, the uncertainty of what's the right answer is really why that is. But otherwise, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found it informative in more ways than one. But with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.